What is good, guys? Welcome back to another Gran Turismo Sport video. Today we're going to be going over the all the cars in the game. So we'll go into Brand Central and we'll go from there. I'm going to be going through them quite quickly, so if you guys want to pause it at any time and check out all the specs, you're more than welcome to, but I'm going to read out most of the basic specs for the most part. Okay, so starting off we have Ford. We have a Ford Focus ST, a 2015 model that makes 250 brake horsepower. The next car on the list is the Ford Mustang GT. It makes 434 brake horsepower. Very nice. Oh, didn't mean to go back. The next car we have another variation of the Ford Mustang making 395 brake horsepower. Very similar to the other one, but just sort of a race spec version. Same as this one, another race spec version making 549 brake horsepower. Going across we have a Mustang rally car, which is a little bit different, making 549 brake horsepower as well. And we have another Ford rally car. Look at that, that's like a Ford ST rally car there, making 538 horsepower. So that is no slouch, that is a quick car. So unfortunately with the cars, there's not that many to choose from, as in each brand only has about maybe 4 to 6 different cars, and maybe 1 or 2 of them are your standard car, and then the rest are sort of the race car models. So moving along, we have Chevrolet, which is another American brand. We have a Camaro SS making 453 brake horsepower. Moving across, we have a Corvette Stingray making 453 horsepower. Very nice as well. We have another variation of the Corvette C7 making 414 horsepower. This is what I mean by more of a race version. It's pretty much the same as the other one, it's just a little bit different and more set up for track. And we have another one here making 551 horsepower. So moving along now, we have Dodge. So in Dodge we have a Dodge Charger SRT Hellcat making 707 brake horsepower. That is one quick car. We have a Viper GTS making 640 brake horsepower. And then from there we have the variants of the 2 standard cars. So we have another Viper making 428 brake horsepower. We have another Viper SRT making 678 horsepower. And then we have this sort of race looking model which makes 693 brake horsepower. We now are moving into Infiniti, which is sort of Nissan, but it's the American version, you could say. With this, I'm not too sure what's going on, but this is a concept car which they have, which makes 535 brake horsepower, which looks absolutely amazing. Okay, next we have Chaparral, which I have not personally heard of before, but it seems to be another race version of the car. And there it is, making 905 brake horsepower, also costing 1,000,000 credits, which is way more than what I have. Alrighty. Now we have this brand here, which is Philadelphia Motors, which I haven't heard of either. It looks sort of like a Lamborghini style, but it makes 598 brake horsepower, so it looks quite fancy as well. I haven't really got around to testing out many of the cars in the game. I've sort of just like worked my way through some of them, the ones which I like. So yeah, let's move along. That is the American cars of what we have there. So really not that many, but let's move along to European cars. So we're going to start with United Kingdom. So we have a Jaguar. Let's see what we got in here. So with the Jaguars, we have an F-Type making 542 brake horsepower. We have another variation of the F-Type making 399 brake horsepower. And then we have a third variation of the F-Type, the exact same one, making 551 brake horsepower. Let's go back here. Next we have Aston Martin, which is an awesome brand as well, very nice. We have a V8 Vantage S making 429 brake horsepower. We have another variation of it making 399 horsepower. We have a V12 version making 519 horsepower. We have an Aston Martin 177 making 748 brake horsepower. And then we have a Vulcan making 820 brake horsepower, which is sort of their high-end Aston Martin, which is very cool. Moving along, we have McLaren. Let's see what we got in here. Going to the showroom, we have an MP412C making 600 brake horsepower. We have a 650 Coupe making 641 brake horsepower. We have a 650S making 399 horsepower. These are sort of the more racy versions of the standard cars. And then we got another 650S GT3, which makes 506 brake horsepower. And then moving along, we got one which is 936 brake horsepower, which is their ultimate Gran Turismo McLaren car. Next we have Lewis Hamilton, which I believe is part of the sponsorship of this game, so I'm not too sure what's going to go on here, but we'll check it out. Doesn't look like there's a lot going on here, so we're just going to get out of this. Okay, next we have German cars, starting with Volkswagen. Let's see what cars we have here. Moving into the showroom, we have a Volkswagen Golf GTI making 216 brake horsepower. We have a Sirocco making 358 brake horsepower. We have another sort of race-looking GTI version making 551 brake horsepower. And then we have this cool little Beetle making 591 brake horsepower. Next we have Mercedes-Benz, which I haven't actually gone into yet. I haven't been this far into the game. We have an A45 AMG making 355 brake horsepower. We have an AMG GTS making 502 brake horsepower. Moving along, we have an SLS AMG making 570 brake horsepower. We have another variant of the AMG making 419 brake horsepower, and another one making 570 brake horsepower. And then we have their very race version, which makes 613 brake horsepower. Moving along, we have BMW. In the BMW show line, we have an electric vehicle, the BMW i3, making 167 brake horsepower. We have, didn't need to go out. We have a BMW M4 Coupe making 425 brake horsepower. And then we have the variant of the M4 making 394 brake horsepower. Next up we have a Z4 GT3 making 508 brake horsepower. We then have an M6 GT3 making 583 brake horsepower. And then we got another M6 making 583 brake horsepower. Next in line we have Audi. We have a TT Coupe 2014 model making 305 brake horsepower. We then have a Cup version of the TT making 335 brake horsepower. Then we have some rally looking versions making 588 brake horsepower. We got an R8 making 585 brake horsepower. And then we have an R18 TDI making 553 brake horsepower, which looks to be their racing version. Next in line we have Mini. With the Mini we have only one car here, which is the Mini Clubman VCT, which makes 388 horsepower, which looks kind of different to your standard Mini as well. Moving along, we also have a Porsche here down the bottom. Let's see what we can find for Porsche. Porsche is new to the Gran Turismo series, because I believe they haven't had sponsorship with them, but even looking so, that doesn't look like there's that many cars in here. So starting off, we have a 911 GT3 RS making 491 brake horsepower. Next up, we have a Cayman GT4 making 379 brake horsepower. We then have a 911 RSR making 509 brake horsepower. And then we have their 919 Hybrid making 500 brake horsepower. We're going to move to French cars next. We have the Renault Sport, which is a Clio RS making 216 brake horsepower, a Megane RS making 261 brake horsepower, another variation of the Megane making 350 brake horsepower, and then we have their race versions, one making 534 brake horsepower, and an RS making 542 brake horsepower. Next we have Peugeot. Peugeot is not really a brand that I enjoy that much, but let's see what they got. They have a 208 GTI making 204 brake horsepower, an RCZ making 152 brake horsepower. Next up we have another variation of that car making 345 brake horsepower. We have a Peugeot VGT making 542 brake horsepower. Next up we have this more variants of the same car making 516 brake horsepower. We have a rally version making 516 brake horsepower as well. Next up we have a 908 race car making 700 brake horsepower, and then we have a hybrid car making 693 brake horsepower. Next we have Citroen. Citroen, we have a DS3 racing model with 203 brake horsepower. We have a GT Citroen road car making 500 brake horsepower. We have another variation of the GT making 394 brake horsepower, and then we have a third variant of it making 599 brake horsepower. Next we have Alpine, which I haven't really heard of before as a brand, and we have an Alpine VGT 2017 making 594 brake horsepower. Next we have Bugatti, which is known for the Bugatti Veyron. Let's see what we got here. We have the Veyron making 433 brake horsepower. we have another version of the Bugatti making 641 brake horsepower, and then we have another Veyron making 986 brake horsepower. Next, we have a Switzerland brand called Tag Heuer, I believe it is. I'm not too sure about this brand either. Let's see what they've got. It seems just to be another sort of sponsorship deal which they have going on in this game, which I'm not too sure. And then last but not least, we have the Italian brands, which is Alfa Romeo. For Alfa Romeo, we have a Mito 1.4 litre Sport, which is 152 brake horsepower. Next up, we have the 4C Launch Edition, which is 235 brake horsepower. Moving along, we have another 4C making 295 brake horsepower. And then we got a third variant of the 4C making 495 brake horsepower. Next, we have Ferrari, and I'm sure most of you guys know what Ferrari is, but let's go through them anyway. Firstly, we have a 458 Italia making 563 brake horsepower. Next to it, we have another Italia 458 making 374 brake horsepower. And then we have a third 458 making 542 brake horsepower. And then we have a LaFerrari making 949 brake horsepower. And then we have Lamborghini. Lamborghini is probably my favourite brand out of all of them so far. We have a Huracan LP610 making 601 brake horsepower. We have another Huracan making 404 brake horsepower. Another one making 576 brake horsepower in their race version. And then we have a Veneno making 739 brake horsepower. Going back now, we're going to move to Asian Pacific cars, which is more the Japanese cars. We're going to start with Toyota. With Toyota, we have the 86 making 198 horsepower. Next up, we have the SFR, which I haven't heard of before, making 133 brake horsepower. Then we have another variation of the 86 making 212 horsepower. Another variation of the SFR making 349 brake horsepower. And then we seem to have more 86s making 358 horsepower. A race version of an FT1, which sort of looks like an 86, making 544 horsepower. An 86 rally car making 516 brake horsepower. A hybrid race car making 529 horsepower. And then another hybrid racing car making 506 brake horsepower. Next we have Nissan in line. Let's see what Nissan's got to offer in this game. First we have a GTR 2017 edition with 564 brake horsepower. We have another GTR making 428 brake horsepower. Then we have a third GTR, a Nismo edition, making 542 brake horsepower. Then we have a rally car GTR making 542 brake horsepower. Next up we have a GTR Nismo LM race car, which makes 604 brake horsepower. Next we have Honda in line, which is sort of one of my favourite brands as well. I really enjoy Honda. We have a Civic Type R, a brand new one, making 305 brake horsepower. We have a race looking model, Project 2 and 4, making 211 brake horsepower. That looks pretty cool. Next we have a 2017 NSX making 570 brake horsepower. We have a variation of the NSX making 394 brake horsepower. Then we have another one making 568 brake horsepower. And then we have a rally car NSX making 557 brake horsepower. Moving along, we have Mazda. In Mazda, we have a Roadster MX-5, a 2015 model making 128 horsepower. Next to it, we have a Atenza sedan, which is the Mazda 6 known in Australia, making 172 brake horsepower. Then we have a Mazda 6 Turbo Mazda Speed model, which is 393 brake horsepower. Then we have the Mazda 3 version, which makes 567 brake horsepower, followed by this racing looking car, Gran Turismo version, making 641 brake horsepower. Next in line we have Subaru. With Subaru we have a WRX STI making 302 brake horsepower. We have another variation to WRX making 377 brake horsepower. We have a rally version of the WRX making 521 brake horsepower, and then we have another version of it making 521 brake horsepower. Next we have Mitsubishi Motors, which is we have the Lancer Evolution making 309 brake horsepower. We have another Lancer Evolution, more of a race model, making 389 brake horsepower. We have another one making 521 brake horsepower, and then we have their rally version making 521 brake horsepower, much like the Subaru. Next we have Daihatsu. So with Daihatsu, we just have the one car, which is the Daihatsu Copen RJ, which makes 146 brake horsepower. Moving along, we have Lexus. Lexus, we have an RCF, which I believe is also known as an ICF in Australia, making 469 brake horsepower. Next to it, we have an LC500, making 469 brake horsepower. Then we have another one making 419 brake horsepower, and then we have the prototype version making 521 brake horsepower. Next we have Gran Turismo style cars, so I'm not sure what's going on here. I don't think this is what we're looking for, so we're going to get out of that. And then last but not least, in this all the cars in the game, we have Hyundai, which is Korean. Let's see what they have to offer in this game. Firstly, we have a Hyundai Genesis Coupe, 3.8 litre, making 343 brake horsepower. We have another variation of it making 384 brake horsepower. Another one making 509 brake horsepower. Then we have a rally version of the Genesis making 499 brake horsepower, followed by the Hyundai racing model making 640 brake horsepower. Well, that is all the cars in the game, guys. Let me know what you think. Happy to go through them all again nice and slow, but for the time being, I believe there is about 150 cars in this game. My personal opinion is it's not really a wide variety. I would have liked to see some older cars, you know, like more versions of certain things. Also in this game, there aren't any modifications which you can really do on the car. The only thing you really do is paint. You can do one engine modification, you can change the wheels, and you can sort of like customize the body to how you like it, but that's about it. Hope you guys enjoyed. More videos to come. Peace out. See you guys later. Bye.